Welcome to the SDA Housing Podcast, brought to you by NDIS Property Australia. Before starting this episode, we need to provide a general disclaimer. Information contained in this podcast is general in nature only. It does not take into account the objectives, financial situation, or needs of any particular person. You need to consider your financial situation and needs before making any decisions based on the information in this podcast. And you should consider seeking independent and professional advice for your personal circumstances. All right, let's begin.
Hello everybody, my name is Minh and I'm your host for today from NDIS Property Australia here in Brisbane, and you're listening to the SDA Housing Podcast, a show that explains, highlights, guides and brings awareness about all things SDA in this ever-changing NDIS world. Today we have a wonderful guest speaker, Dan Acfield, the CEO of Everhomes. Dan, welcome.
Thank you. Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Dan, what is Everhomes? What is it?
Well, Everhomes is a housing provider, so we're a registered NDIS provider, and we simply work in specialist disability accommodation, which everyone would know what it is on this podcast. So we, I guess we're involved with working with people that want to develop SDA, and obviously we run it, find tenants, and ensure that everything's going smoothly, once tenants are moved in.
Wonderful. What areas or regions are you working in across Australia?
Yeah, sure. Well, because, as you know, build time frames take a while. It's been at least, once we decide to go to an area, it takes about 2 years for it actually to come through there. Yeah, so we're based in Southeast Queensland. That's our home base. So I was working for the Office of the Public Guardian, based in Brisbane for many years, and decided to get into SDA to make a difference in people's lives in terms of providing housing where they could really thrive. So, and I guess things have gone really well. Lots of people interested in working with us. So we've agreed to go all throughout Queensland and have our first housing coming through in northern Queensland, starting in Townsville, and should have housing all the way down the coast. Have a little bit of New South Wales, and I guess it's, as I said, it takes a while to come through, so we're always happy to explore those conversations. But yeah, looking at being in Western Australia, and I guess we're happy to be anywhere in Australia as long as we feel like we can provide a good service.
So your wife, Jessica, and yourself started the business. How long ago was this?
Oh, look, I guess it was also, so my father-in-law, Brad, as well. So yeah, family business. We sat around and just kind of started spitballing some ideas. I was working at OPG at that time and seeing a lot of, I guess even coming from prior to the NDIS with disability services in Queensland, saw a lot of people having to live together and being forced to live together. And the other thing was, if they didn't like the supports they were getting, they really had to either choose to stay in that situation and put up with it. And often it could be really awful for them. Potentially, the co-tenant that they had was quite abusive towards them. So I saw SDA was an opportunity to segregate the housing from the supports and improve people's outcomes, and improve their choice over where they lived. But also, there's a lot of people that just because the housing wasn't actually set up for them to be able to use a wheelchair, then that was a really good opportunity to get on board a scheme that the federal government had decided, we're going to fund this. I thought, okay, this is something, we're on the edge of something really positive here. This is a really positive social change. And so I made the decision to leave OPG and start Everhomes. And, at that point early on, we didn't even know what we would be called. And, haven't looked back since, I suppose.
That's great, yeah. But Dan, we always see you at all the expos, the regional expos, and all those events as well. How have you found the regional areas for SDA, particularly the thin markets, which we're going to talk about today, SDA thin markets? What are your thoughts and feedback on those regions as well?
Yeah, there's a few insights that I guess I've had. Now, obviously, we've been traveling up and down the coast, so a regional market, I guess, is different from a rural market. There's different, there's thin markets and then there's really thin markets. Yeah.
Can you explain what those three are?
Well, I would say a regional city um, of a size of, let's say, Townsville is not a thin market, but it is certainly thinner than Southeast Queensland, of course, where there's 3 million people living in the greater area. So there's a big difference there. We're talking percentages of people that need SDA. So broadly speaking, the numbers, as I understand them, are 2% of people in Australia are eligible for NDIS. But a lot of those obviously are not necessarily at the level where they need support with their housing. So it would be a person with an extreme functional impairment or very high support needs, and they don't fit into that standard housing market. And so there have been estimates done of 6% of people under the NDIS as a projection. That we can expect would be eligible for the scheme.
Dan, you told me the numbers in Queensland are more like 3%.
Yeah, they are. They're lower because, well, there's a few things going on. The NDIS is growing. So as the NDIS grows, obviously that percentage changes. We're always seeing higher numbers of people needing SDA and higher numbers of people funded for SDA. But yeah, we're not yet hitting those 6% numbers. Now, somewhere like Mackay, for example, if we're talking about regional areas, Mackay was at 0.8% SDA funding at one point, and there was next to nobody looking in Mackay because just the realities of trying to get an OT, for starters, to be able to help you with your assessment were just logistically difficult. There was no OT in Mackay at that point in time. So then you'd have to get someone down from Townsville. So there's this whole kind of regional problem and rural problem where you actually need to have the services in place there to be able to help people to go and get the funding. And then, of course, there's other things like Townsville was the first to roll out the NDIS. So they're relatively well established, but there are other parts of Queensland and Australia where they were later to roll out. Western Australia would be one of these. So Western Australia, the NDIS is kind of well behind in terms of its evolution than somewhere like Townsville. So maybe people just don't have the knowledge in that area that they could be eligible for SDA, or that they're working with stakeholders that are just trying to get their heads around other things. And SDA is just one of many things they could work on, support coordinators, for example. So you need to have that knowledge base in that area to be able to let people know what they actually might be able to be eligible for. So I find the smaller the place, the more likely you're going to hit barriers like that. I think a lot of that stuff is a matter of time. And sometimes it's a catch-22 as well. You've got to sometimes know that the stock is coming through in that area, and that even that you have had SDA providers or someone else that works in SDA go to that place and have some conversations before you go, okay, well, I'm going to now go through the process of getting this in my goals, to get some SDA and go down that pathway. So, yeah, so there are a few challenges. We try to think of it very statistically. Just simply because I guess I would hate to see some of those places not get serviced at all, just because the early data is reflecting that no one yet has SDA funding. If somewhere like Mackay that had really low uptake, and it also had no SDA as well, if we had just gone, well, no one is ever going to get SDA, this is how it's always going to be, you wouldn't see this corresponding increase in housing that they need in that area, because statistically they definitely have people there that need it, and you wouldn't have people applying. So then what we've seen now is those numbers have increased. Yeah. So is this is from an investor's perspective? I'm assuming, Min, that you're asking me these questions, of course. Yeah.
Yeah, our listeners are pretty much mums and dads across Australia. Some more sophisticated, some fund managers listening on. They want to understand from other marketplace perspectives what your opinion and your insight is on certain markets and certain topics within the SDA, and it's just nice to hear your thoughts
Yeah.
on the homes,
Yeah.
with your experience as to what you see works and doesn't work, and what the market needs more of. I guess, yeah.
Yeah. So the NDIS does release data on this.
Yes.
Obviously, you've got to spend some time going through it and understanding it. And also, what we do with that data is we further break it down into, for example, how many bedrooms are in that place. So you can work that data further, which takes effort. So yeah, so we've got a staff member on board who's able to work with investors to actually give them a report if they need it, or insights into a particular area. But yeah, it's a matter of really understanding what is in the market there currently, understanding the distinction between the different types of housing as well, and then really looking for gaps. That's what we try to do, because you may have nothing in a particular type of housing. So you might have quite a few houses there, or maybe you've got lots of apartments there, but it doesn't mean that the people that want to live by themselves but don't necessarily have apartment funding, like maybe they're not catered for, or is a couple catered for. You've got one partner that's got SDA funding, and they want to live with their dog and a partner. What is in the market in that area for them? So it's really understanding what is going on there and where are those gaps, and what can we expect would be likely to be in demand in that market.
Dan, have you seen more and more of the couple family mix combination coming out, seeking for SDA housing that caters for the family, which is mostly able-bodied versus with the one individual in the family being disabled?
Yeah.
Do you see more of that inquiry for your business?
You know what? I think from the very beginning, we've always had inquiry for that, because there are lots of providers that run a slightly different model than we do. And they've probably already locked in a SIL provider for that place. And they, in actual fact, have much more flexible core supports that they use. So the core supports being the day-to-day, and they might use their partner as their carer for some of that. So that model doesn't work for a SIL. The SIL doesn't want to accommodate them. So off the bat, you've got a whole stack of SDA providers that have got a certain business model that doesn't work for that. Our approach has always been to have a direct relationship with the tenant. So they are directly our tenant. We're not subleasing to a SIL provider, and then the SIL provider's tenant. For starters, on a moral basis, we don't agree with that, because it's not giving them the choice of their supports if they want to change, who cleans the kitchen, so because of that, I think we've always had good inquiry. If you just think of a person with disability like anybody else, we all have diverse ways that we want to live. We all have partners, they may or may not have a partner, but there are certainly people out there that, of course, want to live with their partner. And maybe they've had an accident that's had them end up in hospital. That doesn't mean that they don't have the right to live with their partner. So we very much, when we're taking it from that perspective of wanting to provide housing as a human right, and wanting to allow people to live with as much independence and dignity as we can, there is definitely a need in the market for that. So I would encourage people to think about that. But obviously, that's a sector of the market. It's not everybody. There are some people that are going to have to just share in a traditional SIL arrangement, sharing with two other people with SIL funding, and so it's about diversity in the market, I think, of different products.
Dan, 2, 3 years ago, the market was all about group homes and 4-bedroom homes or HBS and whatnot. I think there's been a great big shift the last year and a half with an understanding that the trend towards a two-participant house or dwelling is more the future of SDA. I've spoken to you a lot in the last 2 years, and you said to me, unless it has a second living space, there's no there should not be an assumption that we're going to get a third participant in the house. What are your thoughts from Everhomes with the design and the trend of participant numbers in dwellings?
Yeah, it's always a tricky one, this one, because the build has to be viable for the investor from a cost perspective. And block size can be challenging. And this is where regional builds can actually be good because the land price is cheaper, as long as you know there's an established need and you're not swamping that area. It can be quite good to enter a regional area. But yeah, the block sizes, let's say for Southeast Queensland, can make it really not viable to even get finance if they are looking for something of a particular size, because SDA, particularly HBS and fully accessible, are larger and they're going to take a larger block. And so there's a cost associated with that. We get it. Investors want a particular return. They might invest in something else if they, can't be guaranteed that kind of return. But really, you've got to think about it from a customer perspective. So this is a market-driven model. If people go into a house and it's just cramped and they feel uncomfortable with the thought of living there, or no, logistically it would be difficult to live in that place, then you're just not going to get the third tenant. The market will make sure of that. It's got, and in actual fact, if we think that house is way too small for a third tenant, we'll just say, well, we're actually not going to put out these existing other tenants in a place where they're going to want to move out. Everyone gets in each other's pockets. As SDA providers that are responsible to the NDIS Commission and actually care about the experience our tenants have at their houses, we can't in good conscience jam them into a house with a tiny living area and not enough space to live. So what you've done if you've created a 3-bedroom house with a tiny living area is you've created a 2-bedroom house with a bedroom which is going to double maybe as a living area, and then an extra ensuite that just sits there. So you've got to really think about that before you move ahead with something like that. I have seen some designs that are maybe a bit flexible. I've seen one where you've got bathrooms on each side, bathroom doors on each side. It's actually going to be a 2-bedroom house, but maybe we'll build the wall over one of the doors or something. I don't know what they're going to do with it, but it's got the adaptability to become a 3rd bedroom later on. From an SDA compliance perspective, that there may be some challenges there, but I've at least seen people trying to think adaptively about it. But yeah, Dan, I think you need 2 living areas if you're going to have a 3-bedroom house, ideally. Yeah.
Yeah, totally agree. In the SDA pipeline stats from the Housing Hub, I think we're seeing about 950, 930 dwellings in construction in Queensland currently right now. What are your thoughts on those numbers, and pretty much knowing that 2/3 of those numbers are going to be HPS, and a lot of them also going to be apartments as well, one resident apartments.
In Queensland, pipeline so this is broadly in Queensland. Yeah. I guess it depends where it's going. And so, like, your competition isn't all of Queensland, of course. Yeah. So you need to look at your local area. In Brisbane, I'd be looking. People tend to go, hey, I don't really want to be north side. I go either north side or south side, or there's this kind of divide between Ipswich and Logan, like that some people get a bit funny with. Gold Coast is a totally different thing entirely, and Sunshine Coast too. But yeah, you'd be looking in your local area to go, well, is my area swamped? What's coming through in the pipeline in terms of development? In some ways, the numbers can be, because if they're based on bedroom numbers, It can be a little misleading from a house perspective because you might not be using all of those bedrooms. We can use apartment funding flexibly. There's a kind of a rule, it's Appendix G under the SDA price guide, where you can use apartment funding to allow people to live in a house with partners, which is often how we do it. So then you've got these other bedrooms that are being not used, but actually the income from that is higher. So that can mislead things a little bit. So having said that, I don't think that situation with partners, like with us, it's probably about 20%, maybe 10 to 20% that we have. And I think that we tend to be pretty heavy into that. So it's not huge numbers, and it doesn't work for everyone.
Yeah. Well, we had an investor who had built that HPS house in Bundamba, and Brad came back to us our client and said, "Look, we have a guy who's disabled, and his family with him. Will you take them on board?" And obviously, the client investor said no. So, if anyone's listening out there, look, remember why you're doing this. It's not just about the money; it's also about the impact of a participant or community who do have a story. And that story is their own family or something behind them. And it was sad to see that the investor, who was already wealthy, reject this family's application from your company, Dan, who had a family. It was only going to be one resident company. And they were quite willing to pay a little bit extra rent for the rest of the family to live there. But if you're an investor, think about those scenarios where people should not be put into a share home with 3 or 4 other strangers when they have a family themselves. Be open to a house with a different outcome, which is to provide a long-term shelter or home, forever home for a family who does have a participant who has SDA funding. So, that's all I can say. Keep your options open. Be mindful of people's circumstances, and help out while you can. That's all I can say.
Yeah.
Don't you agree, Dan?
I would agree with that. I think most people understand there is a bottom line there for people, but we encourage people to be flexible, and some investors do get too greedy about it, and they kind of shoot themselves in the foot because their expectations are much higher than the reality. And so every now and then, categories was the other thing I was going to discuss in this. Every now and then we will get an investor that feels like they can just hold out for a full house of high physical support participants. And generally that just is resolved with a conversation. We've generally onboarded them pretty well before that anyway. But yeah, the conversation is, it's centered on someone that might have fully accessible funding, which is lower, and they're wanting to reject them on the expectation that they'll get a full house of HPS. So, in that case, I would say that they're shooting themselves in the foot. Yep. You need to be able to accept a variety of different funding categories. And in fact, this is all about versatility and capturing a larger market. So it's a very, very niche market. If your niche market is, let's say that area is 3% of NDIS participants, let's say you're in Ipswich right now, there are 55 people with HPS funding in Ipswich, but most of them are accommodated, So you need to be flexible and accept fully accessible, or your house just might be empty. So, exactly. And the other thing to consider with that, the unfortunate reality of it is that people with high physical support needs that need that kind of level of housing, they generally have some significant health issues, and they don't live as long. And it's sad, but we do have tenants that pass away, and they're always in the high physical support category. So if you're thinking about it from the perspective of, hey, I'll lock in this high physical support tenant, for 10 years, and they're going to be living here, and I've got this high physical support level of funding for 10 years, how good's that? Well, actually, they might very easily be palliative, and we're actually providing a palliative service to them. So, that's a really important service that we can provide to them in the last couple of years of their life, to allow them to live with dignity. But if you're thinking it purely from a financial kind of perspective of their funding amount, then I don't think it's going to work out.
The unicorn in this sector is the HPS. I've done the numbers. 0.00372% is the HPS participant numbers in the NDIS. Right?
Oh, overall, throughout the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes, 0.0037%. That's for HPS. FA is exactly the same, 0.00372%. So in theory, the FA and the HPS market participant numbers are 0.00372 times 2 is 0.0074%, which means 99.93% of the market is not in a wheelchair, right? So for all of the investors out there who think, I'll just build a HPS because I was told and promised and assured from my real estate consultant, marketer, that I will get 150,000 rent for 3 participants in wheelchairs. That is not going to happen, is it, Dan? Please confirm with me this.
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's no guarantees in this. It's who's in the market looking. You don't know who's going to come to you. You don't know who's going to be drawn to your house. There's so many factors that might make someone choose a particular house in a certain location. So, I think viewing it on averages is important. So I haven't run the numbers more recently, but I wouldn't imagine it has changed all that much. In terms of the SDA market, which there's about 21,000 people in Australia with SDA need.
Yes.
And of that, I think it was about 40% was improved livability. Robust was between 6 and 8%. And this isn't necessarily going to add up to 100%, by the way. But I think HBS was in about the 38 or something like that.
I've got the numbers on my whiteboard. Let me read it out to you.
Oh, you've got it. Great.
The percentage of new built SDA dwellings as of June 30 are 21% IL, 15% FA, 9% robust, and 55% HPS. The reality is only 10% of the participants are HPS, but yet half of the product being built, if not more, well, 64%. So FA plus HPS
is that a dwellings, man?
Yeah, pipeline dwellings, yes.
Yeah. So the dwellings obviously don't necessarily match the demand. But when I was looking, it was about roughly 40% fully accessible, 40% improved livability. 20% fully accessible.
Yeah.
HBS is still up there. I think it was just under 40%, about 38% at the time. Yeah, robust being very low, 6 to 8%, but there's still a great need for it because it's next to none in the market. Yep. And then the improved livability is actually the highest, almost always. Yep. Because people that build fully accessible, people that build HBS houses generally don't want to accept improved livability. So you can accommodate them, but that funding is often perceived to be too low. There's definitely a need for people to be both flexible, but also there probably needs to be some improved livability in the market. There definitely needs to be more robust. And
I want to give some rough numbers to our listeners right now. If you have an empty HPS house, you can keep on waiting, and you probably won't get it. Or you can accept the 2 or 3 IL participants who can fill in your house straight away, because they are the majority of the market, improve their ability. Just to give you the numbers, 3 ILs in Ipswich would be about 84,000 a year in gross rent. That is enough to pay the costs, the interest, the mortgage payments, and be above break even, which is better than having empty and zero coming in. As time moves forward with all the pipeline, you'll see a lot more empty ones out there. Because if you built the wrong product in the wrong area and you're waiting for the unicorn participant, you may be waiting a long time. So please consider the mix of tenants being FA and ILs in your HPS house, and do not think you're going to get those 3 HPSs, because you're not.
What I would encourage investors to think about if they're simply going to build improvability housing is to consider people that have non-SDA funding as well, who will actually make payments as well individually per room. Now that may be a lot less, but there are some ways in which, for starters, if you've got 2 IL and you just simply cannot find another tenant in there, there are a huge amount of people with a housing need that just don't have an SDA need. So they have NDIS funding, they have SIL funding, so core supports, and they will pay rents to fill that 3rd bedroom, for example. It's something that as a fallback, if you're simply looking for SDA, there is a market for that to get some rent.
How much do you reckon that could be?
Well, look, if you're just charging the tenants themselves, then it would be equivalent to the RRC, I would say. However, and we won't do this, but there will be providers that do in the market. They will charge the SIL provider. And you may actually, if you are one of these providers that is providing the SIL with a house to tenant, they're then going to sublet. If everyone's on board with that, they can actually make a contribution. So there is probably a place for that in the market, that kind of arrangement, contrary to what I was talking about earlier. But that just allows people that don't have SDA or are finding it hard to get that housing, but they're falling through the gaps. It allows them to get housing. And so I guess the reason I speak about that is because if you're one of the lucky ones that gets SDA, then that's great. But I'm interested in people getting housing that they need to be able to live better lives, just period. So if people can do that, and I guess you would run through the numbers of that with them, Min. But if you can make it work, gee, I'd love that, because I have so many people that come to us that we can't really help.
Yes. Well, we are definitely focusing on the SIL, SDA, MTA side of housing on top of SDA as well. So that's our New Year's resolution ourselves, to be more involved in the non-SDA product creation around Australia.
Good. Yeah. Great.
I think the one blessing we have, Dan, in Queensland is, of these 950 dwellings being built in SDA in Queensland, we know, you and I both know, that they won't be filled up with HBSs. We know that, right? So a lot of them will be empty or partially empty, which means that leaves room for the ILs to come in and the non-SDAs to come in. So that's one positive way I could think of it, of the excess stock being built. Yeah.
Yeah.
Because no investor will sit there and will take nothing for you.
But I mean, the other thing that's going to happen, Min, is as the SDA market has slowed, just the housing market will slow at some point. SDA is going to slow down. The SDA participants are not going to slow down. So we have areas where it was saturated in those areas, and we just have people coming to us again and again that we can't accommodate because we don't have the housing in that area anymore. And I think what you'll find is, if you get builders, they want to build in a certain area and do a whole stack of stock at once because it's a lot more affordable for them to do that. So you'll get one area where you get heaps of stock coming out of the ground. All of a sudden, everyone's freaking out because there's a bit of a saturation, but the market will catch up. So that's what I actually worry about a little bit is, are we going to keep on up with that as time goes on? And if people have felt like, if they've gone into one of those saturated areas and they've felt like it was a bit of a dud of an investment because they just chose the area wrongly, will that give SDA a bad name? Because in 5 to 10 years, there's going to be an even greater demand. So,
well, right now we're at 2,500 built product. We have 2,500 in the pipeline around Australia. That makes it almost 5,000. We're still short of the 25,000 even.
We're just at the very cusp of it, really.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah. So Dan, I want to finish off this episode with any final words of advice from you as a company, Everhomes, to any of our listeners right now listening on what they should be mindful of as an investor if they're thinking about coming into the SDA market?
Yes, the biggest number one thing that every investor does worry about and should worry about is, will my house be tenanted? And obviously that's what the whole thing is based on. So you need to make sure that you've done your due diligence on where you build. And that means objective due diligence. It's not just taking someone's word for it to say, hey, this area is great. I've heard Jim said that it was an awesome area, because I know some areas that are now saturated because there are people that have a vested interest in you going to that area. They've got a relationship with the builder. It's all like a really smooth flowing system, and they don't really care that much if your house is tenanted at the end of the day. So you've got to make sure that you have really good confidence that that is a good idea to build what you are building in that area. And that comes down to objective data and talking with people that have feet on the ground and understand what's going on in that area.
My advice to anyone listening is do your homework, talk to many people, many sources, talk to the local providers in the area. Don't believe the words of one individual as a native. Talk to various people who will have data and research and experience on the ground. You as an investor should put your boots on the ground and go for a walk or a drive in the area. Take a look at who's in there, what is being built, and what's the amenities look like. So don't believe anything that one person says. Get your research, talk to lots of people. And if the research and the feedback is the same positive feedback, and you engage other companies like Everhome to do a report for you for $400 for CSD, then if the signs point to a positive outcome, then sure, go. But if there's conflicting information and feedback from everyone on this site, in this area, and the demand in this area, then that's a big red flag.
Totally agree.
Dan, thank you so much for your time. We know you're a very busy man. We hope to, if anyone of our listeners want to get in contact with your organisation, how do they find what website or phone number do they call or contact?
Yeah, our number is 1300 Everhomes, which is actually 1300 383 746. They can obviously go on our website and see our information there, which is everhomes.com.au. And look, if they prefer to email, then wecare@everhomes.com.au would be fine.
And they can talk to either yourself, Dan, or Jessica, or Brad. Is that right? And Matt.
Yeah. We're a growing team, so they may not get us straight away, but certainly we'll have someone to help them out and refer them the right way, and then we can organise a discussion after that. Yeah.
Wonderful. Dan, thank you so much for your time, hey? Appreciate it. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thanks.
We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please make sure you are subscribed and following us so you can keep in the loop with all of our upcoming episodes. We would really appreciate it if you could leave us a 5-star rating, a written review, and to share this podcast with those that could benefit. Until next time, catch you on the next episode.